Stanley Dishon. Family is supposed to be the one constant we can trust. The people who share our blood, our history, our name. They're meant to protect us, to stand as guardians when the world turns dark. Yet what happens when that trust, that sacred bond between kin, becomes the very instrument of destruction? What does it say about the depths of human deception when an uncle, a brother, someone welcomed into the warmth of a family home, becomes the source of a crisis so profound it fractures an entire community? In the quiet suburbs of Shepherdsville, Kentucky, 17-year-old Jessica Dishon was about to face a reality that revealed a different kind of threat, one that can emerge not from strangers, but from those already seated at the family table. The morning of September 10th, 1999, began like any other for Jessica, a senior at Bullitt Central High School. She was preparing to leave for class when everything she knew came to an abrupt halt. Her mother later found Jessica's red car still parked in the driveway, her belongings inside, and one shoe nearby, suggesting something had occurred unexpectedly. For 17 days, Jessica's family and hundreds of volunteers searched tirelessly, holding on to hope despite the uncertainty. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Jessica's remains were found in a rural area several miles from home, bringing an agonizing end to the search and opening a long, difficult investigation. The inquiry that followed was marked by missteps that would trouble law enforcement for years. The first deputy on the scene urged the lead detective to examine the vehicle and surrounding evidence, but his concerns were dismissed. By the time the area was formally secured, numerous individuals had already moved through it, complicating the investigative process. Notes and photographs from the early response were later reported missing, and the case's foundation grew increasingly unstable. In 2001, authorities charged neighbor David Brooks, but after a mistrial in 2003, the case collapsed. It went cold, leaving a lingering wound in the community. But someone knew what happened that September morning, and that person lived among the Dishon family the entire time. Stanley Dishon, Jessica's uncle, had been staying with the family in the years leading up to her disappearance. According to investigators, his interactions with Jessica raised concerns even before her death. As she grew older and developed relationships typical for her age, tensions reportedly grew. Court documents later revealed that on the day Jessica disappeared, she and Stanley had argued at her home. What happened afterward would eventually be pieced together by law enforcement. The breakthrough came in 2013, when Detective Lynn Hunt reopened the cold case with renewed focus. Multiple individuals came forward independently, while Stanley was incarcerated on unrelated charges, reporting that he had made statements to them about the incident. According to these accounts, he described a confrontation with Jessica that escalated beyond control. Additional evidence emerged, including household items linked to Jessica found in a nearby barn, suggesting she had been moved from her home before her death. These findings ultimately shifted the focus squarely onto Stanley. On October 2nd, 2013, 14 years after Jessica's death, Stanley Dishon was arrested and charged. What followed revealed a broader pattern of harmful conduct spanning decades. Prosecutors filed multiple additional charges involving other individuals, alleging misconduct dating back to 1982. The revelations painted a picture of someone who had used trust and proximity to take advantage of those around him. In January 2015, facing extensive evidence and multiple pending charges, Stanley entered an Alford plea to first-degree manslaughter in Jessica's case. The plea allowed him to maintain his claim of innocence, while acknowledging that prosecutors possessed enough evidence for a likely conviction. A kidnapping charge was dropped as part of the agreement. In March 2015, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison, required to serve the majority of it before being eligible for parole consideration. During sentencing, Jessica's parents spoke about the impact of their daughter's loss. Her father, Mike, addressed the man he once called brother, explaining how the events surrounding Jessica's death had reshaped their lives. Her mother, Edna Jett, described how their willingness to help family had been met with a devastating betrayal. She spoke of the lasting emotional void created by Jessica's absence and the life that was taken far too soon. Today, Stanley Dishon continues to maintain his innocence from behind bars, telling reporters that he was wrongfully convicted. Jessica's parents, however, remain confident in their understanding of what happened. They recall moments during the search that raised suspicion, including Stanley's behavior and reactions as the investigation unfolded. Both believe unanswered questions remain about the full circumstances surrounding Jessica's disappearance and death. Stanley Dishon remains incarcerated, serving his sentence for the manslaughter of his niece and for additional offenses against other victims. Jessica's case divided and scarred the Dishon family, leaving emotional and generational consequences that continue to linger. For Mike and Edna, justice arrived slowly and incompletely. Their daughter, a teenager full of hope and looking forward to her future, was taken from them by someone who should have been a source of safety. In the end, the name Stanley Dishon became a symbol not of family loyalty, but of profound betrayal, and a reminder of the dangers that can arise when trust is misplaced within the very relationships meant to protect us. Alex Whipple. There are individuals in this world who can appear entirely ordinary on the surface, blending into family gatherings and daily routines with ease. We assume that people connected to us by blood or history are safe to be around, and we rarely imagine that danger could be sitting quietly in our living room. We tell ourselves that family represents stability and protection, that allowing a relative to stay overnight is harmless, that nothing could possibly go wrong under the same roof. But what happens when that trust is misplaced? How does a seemingly ordinary evening turn into a moment that changes everything? In Logan, Utah, on a spring night in 2019, Jessica Whipple made a decision she believed was thoughtful and routine. She let her brother Alex stay the night. By morning, her life would never be the same. May 25th, 2019, began as a normal Friday evening at Jessica Whipple's home. She and her fiancé, Dietrich Black, spent time talking and unwinding with 21-year-old Alex, who had been visiting. Her daughters had already gone to bed, with 5-year-old Elizabeth, known lovingly as Lizzy, sleeping just outside her mother's doorway. Jessica eventually went to sleep, and Dietrich checked on Lizzy one last time, seeing her resting peacefully. He assumed Alex would simply fall asleep on the couch after a night of drinking. It was a quiet, ordinary household moment that no one realized would be the last time Lizzy was seen. When Jessica woke up around 9:30 the next morning, something felt wrong almost immediately. The front door was standing open. Lizzy was missing, and Alex was gone as well. Jessica's panic grew rapidly, and within minutes, police were notified. Logan authorities launched an extensive search effort, calling in volunteers, search dogs, helicopters, and multiple agencies. The community responded with overwhelming support, determined to help bring Lizzy home. Neighbors searched fields, parks, and neighborhoods, believing that anything was possible as long as hope remained alive. That afternoon, around 3 o'clock, police located Alex, walking alone in a remote area near Hiram, several miles from Logan. Officers noted that he attempted to avoid them, provided conflicting information about his identity, and resisted arrest when approached. At the station, investigators observed stains on his clothing and injuries on his hands, prompting further examination. His behavior in the interview room raised additional questions, and officers secured him again to preserve potential evidence. During questioning, Alex's story shifted repeatedly. At first, he denied being at his sister's home the night before Lizzy disappeared. Then he admitted he had been there. But the timeline changed multiple times, first saying it was earlier in the week, then much longer ago, before finally acknowledging he stayed overnight. He claimed he left early in the morning to go for a walk, mentioning discomfort with being in the house. He offered no clear explanation for the open front door, for leaving behind his belongings, or for why he walked miles away from town. Instead, he spoke about his personal struggles, his childhood, and moments he claimed not to remember. He mentioned that alcohol sometimes caused him to lose awareness of his actions, a statement that deeply concerned investigators. Meanwhile, law enforcement teams worked urgently to locate Lizzy. Items were found in various outdoor areas, some belonging to Jessica's home, others linked to Alex through forensic analysis. Clothing consistent with what Lizzy had worn was discovered and analyzed, and additional objects carrying both Alex's and Lizzy's DNA were identified. Each new finding added to the growing concern about what may have occurred during the early hours of that morning. For 5 days, Lizzy's family and the wider community held on to hope. Vigils were organized, social media campaigns circulated widely, and volunteers continued their search. The Whipple family remained at the center of a heartbreaking wait that felt endless. Then, in a meeting between Alex and his attorney, a decision was made. His lawyer encouraged him to reveal the location of Lizzy's remains so that the family could have answers. In return, prosecutors agreed not to seek the harshest possible penalty. With this arrangement, Alex finally provided information that led authorities to a wooded area near Jessica's neighborhood. There, search teams found Lizzy's body, bringing the search to a tragic conclusion. On May 29, 2019, Alex Whipple was charged with multiple offenses related to Lizzy's disappearance and death. These included aggravated murder, child kidnapping, obstruction of justice, and other related charges involving the handling of evidence and the concealment of Lizzy's body. The case continued to evolve as investigators documented the timeline, collected statements, and pieced together the events of that morning. With each new development, the community that had hoped for a different outcome now faced the reality of what had happened. On August 13, 2019, Alex entered multiple guilty pleas, including an Alford plea on some charges. This meant he acknowledged that prosecutors had sufficient evidence to convict him, even if he did not fully admit to every aspect as described by the state. His attorney referenced past difficulties and personal challenges, but presented no defense capable of countering the weight of the evidence. The judicial process moved quickly, and the Whipple family prepared for sentencing. On September 24, 2019, Judge Kevin Allen sentenced Alex Whipple to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge emphasized the seriousness of the crimes and the impact on the community and the family. He stated that the severity of the case required the maximum sentence, given the nature of the loss and the circumstances surrounding it. During the proceedings, Jessica spoke about Lizzy's joyful personality, her love of nature, her kindness, her fascination with butterflies and bright colors. She described the difficulty of enduring the court process while grieving the loss of her daughter. After the hearing, Jessica released butterflies in Lizzy's memory, an act meant to honor her child and symbolize the light Lizzy brought into others' lives. Community members created the Live Like Lizzy movement, encouraging people to share kindness, compassion, and positivity in the spirit of the little girl who had touched so many hearts. Alex Whipple, now in his mid-20s, remains incarcerated in a Utah prison, where he will spend the rest of his life. His criminal record showed a pattern of escalating behavior in the years before 2019, including prior convictions for assault, drug offenses, and vehicle theft. These incidents, viewed in retrospect, painted a concerning picture of instability and impulsive decision-making. Despite these warning signs, Alex was still welcomed into his sister's home that night, trusted to sleep on the couch, and assumed to be harmless. Lizzy Shelley was 5 years old. She loved laughter, the outdoors, and small moments of wonder. She trusted her family, trusted her uncle, trusted the world around her. That trust is what makes her story so devastating. Her life was cut short, not by a stranger lurking in the dark, but by someone she knew, someone who should have cared for her and protected her. Lizzy's memory continues to inspire acts of kindness. and her community remains committed to honoring her legacy with love rather than despair. Jonathan Quiles. The teenage years are already delicate, a stage when young people try to understand themselves, build confidence, and navigate the confusing world of relationships and family dynamics. 16 is an age when worries should revolve around school, friendships, and future plans, not carrying the emotional weight of a situation that should never have involved a child. What does a young girl do when the person harming her is connected through family ties? When speaking up means risking the stability of the very people meant to protect her? And what consequences follow when the adult responsible for the wrongdoing fears that the truth will end his freedom? In Jacksonville, Florida, Iana Sawyer faced these devastating realities in the final months of 2018, unaware that the man she quietly referred to by a nickname was preparing to ensure she would never reveal what she knew. December 19th, 2018, began as a typical Wednesday at Terry Parker High School. Iana, a sophomore with ambitions and a future ahead, told a friend she planned to stay for a short time with her uncle by marriage, Jonathan Quiles. She was several months pregnant and had already chosen a name for her unborn daughter. Surveillance cameras captured Iana walking away from campus that afternoon. She never returned home. When her family realized she was missing, they searched with urgency. Her aunt, Margie Mobley, sensed instantly that something was wrong. It was unlike Iana to disappear without contacting anyone. The family had quiet concerns about who might be involved. For months, they had heard unsettling speculation about an inappropriate relationship between Iana and Jonathan. Both strongly denied it, and Iana insisted the father of her baby was someone else, using a name that later proved to be an attempt to protect her uncle. At Thanksgiving dinner, Iana's grandmother observed a moment between Iana and Quiles that raised questions. She later advised Iana's mother to be cautious. Kimberly Mobley confronted Quiles directly, telling him not to be alone with her children. But Quiles knew her work schedule and showed up at the home anyway. When police began searching for Iana, Quiles immediately became a person of interest. At the time, he was already in custody on unrelated allegations involving inappropriate conduct with a minor under his care. Investigators recognized a concerning pattern. Quiles had access to young girls, and he repeatedly violated the trust placed in him. Still, the missing person investigation required evidence. That evidence came from someone who knew Quiles better than anyone: his brother. Joseph Quiles struggled with the information Jonathan had revealed to him. In the days after Iana went missing, Jonathan confided details about what had happened, assuming his brother would keep quiet for the sake of family. But Joseph could not carry that burden. He went to law enforcement and disclosed what Jonathan had said. Investigators asked him to wear a recording device and conduct another conversation. That nearly 2-hour audio recording became central to the case. On the tape, Jonathan spoke openly about his involvement with Iana and acknowledged persuading her to meet him at his workplace, Ace Pick Apart, a salvage yard on North Main Street. When Joseph asked direct questions about whether she had been harmed and what happened afterward, Jonathan's responses were clear enough to guide investigators. He also referenced his understanding of decomposition due to his mother's employment at a morgue. The trial began in September 2023, almost 5 years after Iana vanished. Although her remains were never recovered despite a 16-day search of the Trail Ridge landfill, prosecutors believed they had a solid case. More than 60 witnesses testified. The state presented the recordings. They introduced a firearm believed to have been maintained unusually well. Particularly emotional was testimony from one of Iana's younger relatives, referred to in court only as S, to protect her privacy. She testified that Quiles had engaged in misconduct toward her when she was a minor, but she had never reported it due to fear and shame. Another young family member also described inappropriate behavior. Together, the testimonies established a long-standing pattern of exploitation. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. On September 21st, 2023, they announced a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all charges. 2 counts of murder, 1 for Iana, 1 for her unborn child. Additional charges related to unlawful conduct. The same jury later considered whether Quiles should receive execution. After about 75 minutes, they recommended life in prison instead. On October 2nd, 2023, Judge Anthony Salem sentenced Jonathan Quiles to 3 consecutive life sentences. He will never be released. During the sentencing hearing, members of Iana's family spoke publicly for the first time. Her mother described the daughter she lost, the unborn granddaughter who would never experience life, and the emotional void left by their absence. She described the difficulty of grieving while navigating court dates and evidence. Other relatives expressed relief that Quiles would never again have access to vulnerable children. Today, at 38 years old, Jonathan Quiles is serving his sentence in a Florida correctional facility. Other inmates are aware of his case. Through his attorney, he argued that the media coverage surrounding his arrest made it difficult to find an impartial jury and claimed he had been judged before the trial began. But the evidence presented in court, his own recorded words, and the testimony of family members demonstrated a pattern of harmful behavior that extended across years. Iana Sawyer's body has never been discovered. Somewhere, beyond the reach of her grieving family, her remains rest unrecovered. Yet her story continues to be told. Her family understands what happened, even without the physical closure they hoped for. And the man who silenced her voice will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Remembered not as a relative, but as the individual whose actions destroyed a child who trusted him. Iana will forever be remembered as a young girl with potential, whose life was ended not by a stranger, but by someone who should have protected her from harm. Mark Wright. On a cold morning in late August of 2025, the quiet halls of the Effingham County Courthouse, spaces long familiar with whispered conversations and unspoken fears, held a moment that struck everyone present with an unsettling weight. Mark Wright rose from his seat and entered a guilty plea, acknowledging his part in one of the most devastating betrayals a family can endure. He admitted involvement in the deaths of his niece and nephew, 2 children whose lives should never have been touched by violence or neglect. Few realizations are as chilling as discovering that harm came not from strangers, but from someone within the family circle. This is not a story about distant individuals or ambiguous guilt. It is a story rooted in a household, a story about trust violated and childhood stolen. It forces us to confront a difficult truth. Sometimes the greatest danger does not arrive from outside threats, but from those entrusted with care, guidance, and protection. When those obligations are abandoned, the results can be catastrophic. At the heart of this case were 2 children, Mary Crocker and her brother Elwin, J.R. Crocker Jr. Both were only 14 years old when they died. Mary disappeared in October of 2018. J.R. had been gone since November of 2016. In a shocking revelation, neither child had ever been reported missing. Instead, their absences were hidden behind explanations and excuses, leaving neighbors and relatives unaware of what had truly happened. In December of 2018, everything changed. A welfare check at the Crocker family home in Guyton, Georgia, led deputies to a discovery that reshaped the investigation entirely. Buried beneath the backyard soil, behind a house that should have been a place of stability, were the remains of the 2 children. The revelation brought not only heartbreak but deep questions about how their disappearances had gone unnoticed and how the suffering they endured had remained concealed. According to prosecutors, what happened to Mary and J.R. did not stem from a single tragic moment, but from an extended period of mistreatment and extreme neglect. Evidence presented in court showed that both children were subjected to harsh conditions and prolonged restriction of their basic needs. Investigators found indications that Mary had been confined for extended periods and deprived of adequate food, and that JR likely endured similar treatment. Reports showed the children lived under conditions that no child should ever face. Text messages recovered during the investigation added to the sense of deliberate wrongdoing. As family members buried Mary, one adult casually asked another, "How deep?" The exchange revealed not panic or confusion, but a level of planning that deeply disturbed investigators and the public. For authorities, it became clear that the children's suffering had been known inside the home, and yet no one intervened to save them. Mark Wright's role in the case became central once investigators began piecing together the timeline of events. When he entered his guilty plea, he faced several charges, including second-degree murder, cruelty to children, false imprisonment, and concealing the deaths. A plea agreement removed the possibility of a death penalty case, but Wright still confronted the likelihood of spending the rest of his life in prison. His actions, prosecutors argued, contributed heavily to the environment in which Mary and JR endured prolonged mistreatment and ultimately lost their lives. During Wright's sentencing in November, the court delivered a message reflecting the severity of the crime. Judge Matthew Hube, who had presided over numerous difficult cases during his decades on the bench, called this situation an example of the most depravity he had ever witnessed. The sentence handed down was the maximum permitted, 80 years, to be served consecutively across all charges. The judge made clear that the punishment needed to reflect both the gravity of the children's suffering and society's responsibility to protect its most vulnerable members. Addressing Wright directly, the judge spoke not with anger, but with unwavering clarity. He reminded Wright that his own relatives once described him as the protector of the children, the dependable adult who was supposed to bring stability and care when the family struggled. Wright had been trusted by the children, trusted by relatives, trusted by those who believed he would act with humanity. Yet the evidence showed that instead of safeguarding the children, he became complicit in the very harm that destroyed their lives. The courtroom grew silent as the judge imagined the words the children themselves would have spoken had they survived. If these children, particularly Mary, could speak, he said, they would ask, "Uncle, why did you not protect us? Why did you do this to us?" The statement captured the core tragedy of the case. Two young lives silenced, unable to ask the questions that justice now had to raise in their place. Wright had once been viewed as the approachable relative, the one who offered help and seemed to support the family through difficult times. Neighbors described him as friendly, reliable, even generous. But in the justice system, a person is assessed by their choices, not by their reputation. And Wright's choices, his failure to intervene, his participation in concealment, his silence when action was desperately needed, painted a picture far darker than the one he presented to the outside world. This case stands as a painful reminder that harm can take root quietly. It can exist behind closed doors, behind polite smiles, behind reassurances that everything is under control. For Mary and JR, childhood ended not in safety but in abandonment. Their final resting place was the backyard of their own home, a place that should have symbolized security, but instead became the site of their final suffering. As Wright begins a sentence that will likely last the remainder of his natural life, the two children remain the focus of the story. Their absence lingers in the memories of relatives and in the questions that will never be fully answered. The voices they lost must now be represented by the court, by investigators, and by all those who refuse to overlook the warning signs that once went unnoticed. What kind of person becomes involved in the mistreatment of children they were entrusted to protect? What allows such behavior to continue without intervention? How did a community remain unaware while two children slowly disappeared from view? This story does more than document a series of crimes. It challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths, to consider how easily suffering can be hidden, and to recommit ourselves to safeguarding those who cannot speak for themselves. Mary and JR's lives should be remembered not for their tragic end, but for the urgency with which their story calls us to pay attention, to look closer, ask harder questions, and protect the innocent far more diligently than they were protected in their final years. Duran Morgan. There is something uniquely unsettling about violence that erupts in the middle of what should be the safest and most ordinary moments of life. Not in isolated alleys or hidden corners of a city, but in kitchens, backyards, and family gatherings. The places where birthdays are celebrated, children run freely, and relatives come together to share a meal. Because when tragedy unfolds in those familiar spaces, it shakes our understanding of safety itself. It reminds us that danger does not always appear in dramatic form. Sometimes it sits beside us at the table. Sometimes it carries our last name. On the evening of May 27th, 2023, a Memorial Day weekend gathering at a home on Pineville Lane in Street Albans, Queens, looked much like countless others across the country. Relatives filled the backyard, plates were served, conversations flowed easily, and the warm weather brought an atmosphere of comfort and familiarity. Among those present were 40-year-old Duran Morgan and his 25-year-old nephew, Chevron Millings, who lived at the residence. The evening should have been a simple family celebration, but one argument, over something remarkably minor, set in motion a series of choices that would tear the family apart. The disagreement began over payment for food being served at the gathering. Voices rose as frustrations escalated. It was the type of dispute most families would resolve quickly, a momentary flare of tempers that would fade with time. But this confrontation intensified rapidly. In an effort to calm the situation, Millings and another guest guided Morgan out through a side door of the house, hoping that space and time would diffuse the tension. For many people, this would have been the moment to walk away and let emotions cool. But Morgan chose a different path, one that would have irreversible consequences. Instead of leaving the property, Morgan circled around to the front of the home and re-entered. Confronting his nephew once again, he drew a handgun from his waistband. What followed unfolded in front of the people who loved both men. Morgan fired multiple shots toward Millings, striking him repeatedly and causing injuries that proved fatal. His niece, who was standing nearby, was also hit in the leg and suffered a graze wound to her forehead. Within moments, the joyful gathering turned into a scene of fear and chaos. As relatives tried to help the injured, Morgan fled the home in a white Mercedes-Benz SUV, leaving behind the devastation he had created. Police officers from the 113th Precinct responded quickly to a 911 call reporting the shooting. When they arrived, they found Millings unresponsive and his sister seriously injured. Emergency medical personnel transported both to Jamaica Hospital Medical Center. Millings was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. His sister, though in stable condition, faced a long physical and emotional recovery. Her injuries marked only part of the trauma. She had witnessed the loss of her brother in a moment that could never be undone. Morgan fled to Georgia shortly after the shooting, leaving investigators searching for him across state lines. But within a week, he returned to New York and surrendered at the 113th Precinct Station House on June 4, 2023. His arrest brought relief to a community shaken by the incident, though it could not erase the grief felt by the family. As the investigation unfolded, a more complex portrait of Morgan began to emerge. Only months before the shooting, he had been arrested for allegations involving physical discipline toward his daughter and for possessing high-powered ammunition. Despite the seriousness of those accusations, he had been released without bail. Court documents also showed that in 2019, Morgan faced an accusation of domestic violence involving a girlfriend, though that case was later dismissed. Neighbors described the household as one familiar with loud disputes and noted that Morgan had been involved in disagreements before. During arraignment, Morgan portrayed himself as an Iraq War Marine veteran, a claim prosecutors quickly established was untrue. The trial began on November 20th, 2024, in Queen's Supreme Court, before Justice Michael Aloise. Prosecutors presented a detailed reconstruction of events, supported by eyewitness testimony from multiple relatives who had observed the confrontation firsthand. Their accounts, combined with physical evidence and Morgan's decision to flee, formed a compelling narrative of responsibility. Prosecutors argued that the shooting was intentional, unjustified, and carried out in full view of family members who had merely gathered for a holiday weekend celebration. When closing arguments concluded, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, a sign of how decisive the evidence had been. On November 25th, 2024, the jury found Morgan guilty on all charges: second-degree murder for killing his nephew, first-degree assault for injuring his niece, and second-degree criminal possession of a weapon for brandishing a firearm during the confrontation. Queens District Attorney Melinda Katz later remarked that a moment meant for family togetherness had turned into tragedy over a dispute that should never have escalated into violence. She emphasized that Morgan's actions had deeply harmed his own niece and devastated the entire family. With the conviction secured, Justice Aloise scheduled sentencing for December 16, 2024. Morgan now faces a potential sentence of up to 50 years to life in prison. As he awaits that decision, the consequences of his actions continue to reverberate. A young man's life was cut short. A young woman continues to heal physically and emotionally from wounds inflicted during a family gathering. The relatives who were present will forever carry the memory of that night, their sense of security shattered by violence that emerged unexpectedly and needlessly. This case serves as a stark reminder of how quickly ordinary disagreements can escalate when tempers override reason, and when access to a weapon turns a momentary conflict into a life-changing tragedy. The dispute that triggered the violence, a disagreement about a small food payment at a cookout, makes the outcome even more difficult to comprehend. It underscores how dangerous unchecked anger can be, and how the most devastating acts sometimes come from those who share our homes, our gatherings, and our family ties. As the community reflects on what happened, the story of Duran Morgan stands as both a tragedy and a cautionary tale. It shows how a single decision, made in anger and without regard for consequence, can fracture families beyond repair. And it reminds us that violence, even in the most familiar places, can leave scars that last for decades. Stephen Fraser Myers. Family gatherings are supposed to be sanctuaries. We attend them carrying the unspoken assumption that whatever chaos exists in the outside world, whatever challenges lie beyond our homes, we are safe among our own blood. We sit across from uncles and aunts and cousins, sharing meals and memories, trusting in the bonds that kinship provides. Yet what happens when that very kinship is betrayed? When the person seated beside you at the table, someone who married into your family and promised loyalty, chooses actions that shatter lives. The answer unfolded in a quiet neighborhood in South Florida, in the life of a young woman who would never see the future she had envisioned. On the morning of July 26, 2019, residents of a calm street in southwest Miami-Dade County were awakened by commotion outside. By the time first responders arrived at a home along Southwest 307th Street and 152nd Avenue, 21-year-old Winnie Mendoza had been fatally harmed in a sudden and tragic incident. The scene left neighbors and family in shock. A young woman whose life was brimming with promise was gone in an instant, and the circumstances quickly revealed that this was not a random act, but something far closer to home. Investigators identified the person responsible as 44-year-old Stephen Fraser Myers, the husband of Mendoza's aunt. Reports indicate that Myers had been involved with Mendoza in a personal connection over the past 2 years. On that morning, he followed Mendoza as she returned home. An encounter occurred at her residence, and within moments, a confrontation escalated into tragedy. What began as a dispute between individuals quickly became the defining event that would devastate an entire family. The confrontation was fueled not by a chance encounter, but by complex dynamics within the household and personal relationships. Maya's actions resulted in Mendoza losing her life at a place that should have been safe, the threshold of her own home. She had been working as a pharmacy assistant while pursuing her dream of becoming a nurse, her life stretching ahead with countless possibilities. In a moment, those plans were taken away, leaving a family and community to confront a loss that felt incomprehensible. Following the incident, Myers returned to his own home and informed his wife, Luisa Amanda Mendoza, about what had happened. The disclosure was not an appeal for help or support. It was a factual admission delivered to the person most closely connected to the victim, a member of the family now deeply affected. Myers then left the residence, but law enforcement acted quickly, ensuring he would not remain free for long. Miami-Dade police responded to reports of the incident shortly after 8:30 that morning. When officers arrived, they found Mendoza's life had ended, and an immediate investigation was launched. Myers was identified as the primary suspect based on witness statements and information provided by his own wife. Authorities located and apprehended him shortly after he had left his residence. During questioning, Myers admitted to his involvement in the tragic event. He was charged with one count of second-degree murder and held without bond at the Turner Guilford Night Correctional Center. The case sent shockwaves through Mendoza's extended family and the neighborhood community. The family, with roots in Chinandega, Nicaragua, had always been described as close-knit. Mendoza's mother, Yesenia Mendoza, spoke to local media, describing the experience as a living nightmare. Those who knew Winnie remembered her dedication to her family and her determination to build a future in healthcare. Co-workers at the public supermarket pharmacy where she worked described her as kind, committed, and supportive of those around her. Many relatives expressed disbelief at Maya's account of the situation, suggesting there were unanswered questions and complexities beyond what was initially reported to authorities. At his initial court appearance on July 27, 2019, Myers appeared before Judge Ramiro Areces. His attorney, Michael Mira, argued that Myers should not face charges in connection with the incident, but the judge denied the request and ordered him held without bond. Myers' brother, Doug, who attended the hearing, noted that the family was trying to understand what had transpired, emphasizing the unresolved questions surrounding the events of that day. Meanwhile, law enforcement maintained that sufficient evidence had been collected. Myers' admission, combined with recovered materials and witness accounts, provided a clear understanding of what had occurred. The tragedy left Mendoza's family confronting the reality that a young woman with an entire lifetime ahead of her had been taken in a sudden and irreversible way. She would not celebrate her 22nd birthday, which was only weeks away. Her aspirations of completing her nursing education and contributing to healthcare were cut short. Family gatherings that once included her laughter and energy would now bear the weight of her absence. The tightly woven family bonds, long a source of strength, were suddenly fractured. This case exemplifies a form of family tragedy that strikes at the very core of trust. Myers' position within the family came with implicit expectations of care and protection. He was an uncle by marriage, a husband, a father. Yet, those roles were violated in a way that has left permanent consequences. Whether the reasoning behind Myers' actions was a personal justification or a misrepresentation of circumstances, the outcome remains the same: a young life lost, and a family forced to navigate profound grief. As legal proceedings continue, the Mendoza family continues to process the impact of this loss. The sense of security once felt within family circles has been disrupted. The knowledge that danger can emerge from within one's own household has added a layer of caution to daily life. This case serves as a sobering reminder that personal conflicts, even within close-knit families, can have far-reaching and tragic consequences. The incident also highlights the importance of vigilance, communication, and support systems within families and communities. While trust is foundational in relationships, Awareness and proactive measures can be critical in preventing escalation when conflicts arise. Mendoza's story resonates not only because of the personal loss, but also as a cautionary tale for families everywhere. The bonds we cherish can, in rare circumstances, be exploited, and lives can be irreversibly changed in moments. Community response has reflected both sorrow and solidarity. Neighbors have come forward to share memories and support the grieving family, while local organizations have emphasized the need for awareness around family dynamics and conflict resolution. Mendoza's co-workers, friends, and extended family members have all described her as someone who embodied care, dedication, and hope, qualities that made the loss even more poignant. In examining the broader implications, the case underscores the duality of family life, the sanctuary it can provide, and the vulnerabilities inherent in intimate relationships. Legal experts note that cases involving internal family conflicts require careful investigation, not only to determine accountability, but also to understand underlying dynamics that may prevent future tragedies. The Mendoza case has prompted conversations in local media and among community leaders about strategies to support families facing tension, highlighting the intersection of personal relationships and public safety. Ultimately, the story of Stephen Fraser Myers and Winnie Daniela Mendoza is a reminder of both human fragility and resilience. It is a story about a family's enduring love and the heartbreak that accompanies unexpected loss. It is a story that challenges assumptions about safety, trust, and the nature of domestic relationships. While the legal system seeks resolution, the Mendoza family continues to honor Winnie's memory, cherishing the life she lived and the potential she represented. As Myers awaits the outcome of his legal proceedings, the community reflects on the broader lessons of the case. Safety within homes, the responsibilities inherent in family roles, and the capacity for violence, even among trusted individuals, are themes that resonate far beyond Miami-Dade County. For families across the nation, Mendoza's story serves as both a warning and a call to value communication, intervention, and awareness in preserving the bonds that define us. In the end, this case reminds us that vigilance, care, and the nurturing of trust are essential, not only to prevent tragedy, but to safeguard the lives we hold most dear. Miluz H. Keith III. The television flickers in a grandmother's living room. Children lounge across the couch, absorbed in the screen, experiencing the comfort and safety that comes from being in a familiar, loving home. A door opens. Footsteps approach. In that moment, before recognition can settle in, a quiet tension exists, the fragile moment between normalcy and disruption, because the person entering is not a stranger. It is someone from within the family, someone whose presence is as ordinary as the furniture, whose familiarity masks the potential for chaos. That ordinariness is precisely what makes the events that follow so profoundly shocking. On the afternoon of Sunday, July 17th, 2016, 12-year-old Cheyenne Stewart and her 10-year-old brother, Tyjuan Green, were spending a typical summer day at their grandmother's house on Columbus's east side. They were watching television, laughing, and sharing the easy companionship that siblings enjoy, unaware that their uncle, Miluz H. Keith III, would soon turn that ordinary moment into a tragedy. 59-year-old Keith lived in the same home with his mother, the children's grandmother, and his presence in the house had been routine, expected, and familiar. Yet, that afternoon, something within him escalated into conflict, and the consequences would be devastating. Keith entered the living room where the children sat. The confrontation that unfolded was sudden and irreversible. In an instant, the peace of the home was shattered, leaving behind confusion, fear, and loss. Cheyenne Stewart died as a result of the incident. Her brother, Tyjuan, was seriously affected, but survived after receiving urgent care. The children's grandmother, present in the home, was not physically harmed, but but she witnessed a catastrophic event in the space that had always been a sanctuary. Emergency responders rushed the children to Nationwide Children's Hospital. Medical teams provided extensive care for both, focusing particularly on Cheyenne. Despite the efforts of the hospital staff, 12-year-old Cheyenne Stewart passed away. Taejuan survived, but required substantial treatment and an ongoing recovery process. Beyond the physical impact, he was left to navigate the emotional reality of losing his sister, his closest companion, in a setting where he had felt completely safe. Police arrived at the grandmother's home shortly after the incident. Keith remained on the scene and was arrested by officers without resistance. In the hours that followed, investigators began reconstructing the events that had led to such a sudden and unfathomable loss. According to authorities, Keith admitted to causing the harm. His stated reason was related to frustration about the household dynamics. He reportedly resented the children being in the house at that time. While the motivation may seem small in comparison to the outcome, the consequences were immediate and irreversible. 2 young lives were forever altered because of the actions of an adult who shared their home and family connection. The contrast between the motive and the result is staggering. Children in a family home often create noise, require supervision, and demand attention, but they are also among the most vulnerable and deserving of protection. Keith's actions demonstrated a disregard for those responsibilities and an inability to prioritize the welfare of the children in his care. The consequences of that failure were tragic, leaving a community and a family struggling to reconcile normal expectations with extraordinary loss. Keith was charged with murder and held at Franklin County Jail on a $2 million bond. At his court appearance, the judge issued restrictions preventing him from contacting Taejuan or returning to the grandmother's home. While prosecutors prepared their case, the family focused on coping with a grief that no one should experience. Relatives described Cheyenne as sweet, caring, and full of promise. She was a student at South Champion Middle School, with her life ahead of her. Family members remarked on how distant Keith was in practice, despite his familial relationship. Their aunt, Katosha Stewart, described the surreal nature of the loss, explaining that it felt unreal and difficult to process. The family faced the dual challenge of arranging funeral services for Cheyenne, while supporting Taejuan's recovery, both physically and emotionally. He had lost his sister and closest companion, a relationship that shaped his everyday life. The awareness that this incident was preventable, rooted in adult frustration rather than any fault of the children, added a painful dimension to their grief. Community members rallied to support the family, providing fundraising assistance and emotional support during a time that seemed almost impossible to navigate. Prosecutors built a case against Keith based on his admission, physical evidence, witness testimony from the grandmother, and accounts from Taejuan. Unlike many incidents where intent must be inferred, Keith's statements provided direct insight into his motivations. Combined with corroborating evidence, the case established a clear account of what occurred. The legal process emphasized accountability, reinforcing the principle that acts of harm within a household cannot be justified, regardless of the perceived minor provocations or personal frustrations of an adult. As the proceedings continued, the family wrestled with both loss and betrayal. Keith's actions violated basic expectations of family responsibility, adult supervision, and household cooperation. His choices were deliberate and targeted the most vulnerable members of the household. The case highlights the devastating impact of failing to protect children and the long-term consequences for families when trust within a home is broken. The story of Milos H. Keith III serves as a reminder that threats to safety are not always external. Family conflict, mismanaged emotions, and unchecked frustration can manifest in ways that have life-altering effects. 2 children had arrived at their grandmother's home, expecting a normal afternoon. One child did not return home. The other carries both physical and emotional scars that will persist throughout his life. The incident underscores the importance of prioritizing protection, empathy, and responsibility in family relationships. This case also demonstrates the broader societal need for awareness and intervention in situations where household tensions escalate. Supporting families, particularly those with multi-generational living arrangements, requires resources, communication strategies, and community involvement. The tragedy of Cheyenne Stewart's death highlights that prevention depends not only on individual responsibility but also on community vigilance and support systems. Ultimately, the story of Keith and the Stewart family is one of both vulnerability and resilience. It is a narrative about the sudden disruption of a family's sense of safety and the long-term emotional and physical effects of such events. While the legal system addresses accountability, the family continues to honor Cheyenne's memory, reflecting on the life she led, the promise she represented, and the impact she had on those around her. As Keith awaits the outcome of his legal proceedings, the community reflects on the lessons inherent in this tragedy. Safety in the home, accountability for adults, and the protection of vulnerable individuals are central concerns. For families everywhere, this case serves as a somber reminder. Even in spaces of familiarity and love, risk can emerge from within, and vigilance, empathy, and responsibility are essential to safeguarding those most in need. In the end, the loss of Cheyenne Stewart challenges us to consider how we define protection, trust, and care within our homes, and the consequences when those principles are violated.